do it to Mike.
Great. So yes, hi everyone. I want to first of all really thank Tony for supporting me in this effort, and of course to our wonderful speakers today, and for all of you for joining tonight's event. It's been so wonderful to work with you, Tony. I know you say that I'm a young person, but you're so youthful too. So I really enjoyed just our many conversations. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you again for attending tonight's virtual event. I'm sure everyone is very busy. So thank you for attending in the midst of your busy schedules. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join Watertown Citizens recently and to learn that there's such committed peace builders right here in our community. And considering, the absolutely heartbreaking state of our world right now, I'm also really grateful for the opportunity to just gather here tonight with all of you. And so, as Tony shared, tonight's event is about how we can encourage our city of Watertown to endorse the Back from the Brink campaign. And some of you might know about this campaign already, and others might be hearing about it for the first time. So, Tony and I thought we could first share some basic information about it before hearing from our amazing speakers, which you'll get to meet in just a few minutes, and who have inspired me greatly throughout this whole process. But before I jump into those details, I asked Tony if I could take a moment to just briefly share my personal commitment to this issue of nuclear abolition. So, in addition to being a recently proud Watertown citizen, I just moved here in 2021. I'm also a Buddhist, and I work at a Peace and Dialogue Center founded by the late Buddhist peace builder Daisaku Ikeda, who I also consider my mentor in life. Mr. Ikeda was a youth in Japan when the atomic bombs dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he witnessed firsthand the absolute cruelty of war, and that it's always innocent, ordinary people who suffer the most, as we see today. He once said, to fundamentally negate the existence of those seen as enemies, to be willing to eradicate them with an extreme destructive power, this cruel tendency to deny human dignity underlies the thinking that justifies the possession of nuclear weapons. And he really, talked with countless world leaders, thinkers, ordinary citizens about not just the dangers of nuclear weapons, but also the thinking and mindset that allows these weapons to exist in the first place. And he believed that if we address this human tendency to dominate and harm others, then we can abolish not just nuclear weapons, but also war and violence. So, because of this, his unwavering commitment until the very end of his life, he just passed late last year. I was inspired to take action in whatever way I can. And for me, this Back from the Brink campaign is a powerful way for us to demand for change from the ground up. And I've also been deeply moved to see all the efforts of many of you here in Watertown, week after week, demanding for an end to the wars and injustices that are happening all around the world. So I also want to say thank you all for all of your efforts and for inspiring me and giving me hope in the midst of these very hopeless times. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about myself. And so, now what is this Back from the Brink campaign all about? I can't, speak so well about it. So you'll get to hear from our wonderful speakers today. But the full name of this campaign is Back from the Brink, bringing communities together to abolish nuclear weapons. And it's a US-based grassroots coalition of individuals, organizations, and elected officials working together toward a world free of nuclear weapons and advocating for common sense nuclear weapons policies to secure a safer, more just future. This campaign calls for a simple 5-point set of practical policy solutions that would greatly reduce the real and immediate risks posed by nuclear weapons and the chances that they will ever be used again. And so, by endorsing in this campaign, we would be calling on the United States to lead a global effort to prevent nuclear war by a few key points, which I thought I could share their brochure because it's very clear. So one is to actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. Two, to renounce the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any president to launch a nuclear attack, taking US nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, and finally canceling the plan to replace its entire arsenal with enhanced weapons. So to date, over 400 health, environmental, academic, peace, faith, and justice organizations have endorsed Back from the Brink, and numerous US municipalities and states have adopted resolutions supporting its policy solutions, including neighboring cities and towns such as Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Newton, Brookline, Marshfield, and others. And so tonight, we'll get to hear from three incredible nuclear abolition activists on how they were able to get their towns and cities to endorse this campaign. And Tony, as he shared, will also share more about how we could do the same here in Watertown and what steps we would need to take next. And so again, thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit tonight. And thank you again for joining. And so I think, Tony, if I heard you correctly, we would jump in to our first speaker tonight. So we actually have the program director from IPPNW, which is the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. I've gotten that down now because I hung out so much with Molly and her wonderful colleagues, and I've learned so much from her. So I think we're going to start with Molly, and she'll share how she was able to get Cambridge to endorse Back from the Brink. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. I can only echo everything that Lillian said. I'm obviously, since I'm here, I'm not a Watertown resident, but really glad that and grateful for you all for welcoming me into your space this evening and to share a little bit about Back from the Brink and my experience in Cambridge. So I'm hoping to speak for, closer to 5-6 minutes so we have enough time for conversation to talk about next steps and how to really move this in Watertown. I'd like to just maybe start by talking about kind of three key reasons why we decided to bring this to Cambridge and why I hope, we can bring this resolution forward in Watertown. The first being that cities are the main targets of nuclear weapons. As such, cities have a special responsibility to their constituents to speak out against any use of nuclear weapons and the role of nuclear weapons in any national security doctrine. Following any use of a nuclear weapon detonation, there can be no meaningful medical response anywhere in the world. That obviously includes Watertown. So for your dedicated doctors, first responders, surgeons are not able to respond to any use of nuclear weapons, whether that's in the city or whether that's supporting, local towns and municipalities, including Boston and surrounding cities. Just for comparison here and to kind of put this into context, in Hiroshima in 1945, between 80 and 90% of nurses and physicians were killed or injured following one now relatively small bomb, and 42 out of the 45 hospitals became non-functional. I'm not saying this to scare anybody or to be a fear monger, but that's kind of, one of the main impetuses why I'm involved in this work and why I think it's incredibly important that cities, which again will be held responsible for responding to any threat, take a stance against these weapons before they're used. Our local leaders have the ability to take action, and as Lillian so clearly laid out, we have the platform already. It's not like it's being created from the ground up here. Kind of my second core reason for being involved in this work and for really believing in the Back from the Brink platform is that nuclear weapons aren't kind of an abstract future threat. We're wasting millions of billions of dollars on maintaining our nuclear arsenals, on building new nuclear weapons, just these incredibly wasteful spending priorities that we have. According to the National Priorities Project, and this is outlined in the resolution that Tony has, Watertown residents pay $4.77 million in taxes to produce and maintain the US's nuclear arsenal. That is completely and totally unacceptable. There's really no other way to outline it that way. Again, these weapons really only serve to destroy our communities, to destroy cities. That is their main purpose. And we're wasting, again, billions of dollars on maintaining them, on making so-called better weapons. Again, to put this into context, with almost 5 million of your tax dollars going towards weapons of mass destruction, that could be spent on the salaries of 40 elementary school teachers, 1,300 children's healthcare for children, or wind power for almost 16,000 houses in Watertown. Our investments are a reflection of our priorities, and Watertown's priorities should reflect investments in our children, in clean air and water, and in our future. The third reason why I think, this is such an important platform and why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today, is just because I love my city. I love Cambridge. I wanted to protect Cambridge, do whatever I can. People try to belittle resolutions like this, say that they're just words on paper, but kind of building up that norm and doing what we can to protect the world around us, to the people around us, is incredibly important. Everything I heard in the first 15 minutes of this call shows that all of you care very, very deeply about Watertown, very, very deeply about people close by, and also our global network of citizens. So I think that goes without saying in this group. So, okay, we hear all of that. What do we do now? I will start off by saying that my process in Cambridge was very, very easy because as Watertown does, and as a lot of surrounding towns do, Cambridge has a very, very strong history of anti-nuclear activism. And our city council in 2021 was very apt to this cause and kind of let us just slide in. But I think it kind of goes to show that if you talk to the right people, you're able to push these things through. When you're getting names for the petition, if you talk to the right person, you might get 20 more people. These conversations really matter and have a kind of spiral effect from there. In 2021, I was able to combine forces with Elaine Scarry, who's a Harvard University professor and a longtime disarmament expert and activist, to bring this forward to the Cambridge City Council. We consulted with local partners, including Greater Boston PSR, which Anna is engaged with, Massachusetts Peace Action, Union of Concerned Scientists, and others in the Cambridge area. The two of us were able to draft the resolution and signed a joint letter to our city councilors requesting their endorsement. So this is, you all already kind of have this process down from there. We were able to get two co-sponsors pretty much immediately. We had a bit of dialogue over email, which I found to be extremely helpful. Again, I'm preaching to the choir here. You all are already very, very engaged in your community, but I found it to be really helpful at the time, kind of coming out of this COVID fog, to be able to connect with my local representatives and to communicate that way. And there was more conversation that went on afterwards. So again, it was overall a very positive experience, but I think it's important to look at what challenges we faced in this process, because even though, again, with Cambridge, there weren't many problems that we faced in this process, it passed unanimously, which was pretty incredible to see. In my work with IPPNW, where generally we face many, many roadblocks in this work, whether we're talking about local resolutions, national policies, there's always going to be naysayers, and there's always going to be people that are saying, this isn't our problem, this is not a local issue. And to that, I would just like to say, let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. Nuclear weapons are currently targeting our cities. It's important for people on the grassroots to speak up against these issues. Not all of us can go to DC and talk to our national representatives. This is a way to show that people all across the country care about this, and to be able to connect with one another and build up one another's work in a really positive way. Again, there's a lot of doom and gloom obviously involved with nuclear weapons, but I think there's a lot of hope that comes with passing these resolutions and being able to say, I have the same stance as somebody across the country, and I have the same stance as, I think it's up to maybe 8 cities and municipalities in Massachusetts. Anna can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But I think that's a really incredible thing to be able to point to, and to really celebrate those wins when things seem and are pretty dire right now around the world. And then I guess I'll just end again on one more positive note, and just the importance of this being an educational tool, and being able to talk to local community members and bring this to a local level, and not kind of pull nuclear weapons out of the abstract as they so often are, linking, disarmament as a core priority to reaching climate goals, linking divestment goals in disarmament to other local pressing matters like healthcare, like education, like supporting people seeking asylum and everything else that was spoken about at the beginning of this call. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks again for having me today. And I'm really excited to have this conversation and to explore how, we can all work together to get this through Watertown citizens. Thanks.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you so much, Molly. I always enjoy hearing you share about nuclear abolition because I feel like you're able to clearly present the facts, but also provide a very hopeful action plan forward. So thank you also for sharing the three reasons why you feel like this campaign is important to you. And those numbers were really helpful to hear as well. And so I know we might have questions for Molly that we can save for later. But now I would love to pass it over to Anna Lanakis from GVPSR. I'm sure many of you know her. She's actually the one who really inspired me to get Watertown to pass back from the brink because she showed up at my workplace one day and she said, I got it passed in Marshfield. And I thought, why isn't Watertown on this list? So Anna, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lillian. And so much of what Molly said resonated with me and is exactly what I was planning to say. So I might underscore some of the same points that she had said. There are 20 municipalities in Massachusetts that have passed resolutions at this point. And they range from, very progressive to very conservative towns, which actually is very heartening for me. And one of the reasons I was nervous about initially bringing a resolution to Marshfield is because we tend to be a more conservative town. And I know there are a lot of folks in our town who support and work for the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, and they associate the causes with each other. I, of course, have worked for years to shut down the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant because of its threat to public health and safety. But that was not the reason exclusively that I was choosing to bring this resolution to town. This was because I thought this was even a bigger threat than the local power plant was. So I was sort of uncomfortable heading into the concept of bringing it to the town, mostly because in Marshfield, unlike Cambridge, we don't just vote at the city council level, we have to take it to town meeting. And so the thought of being in front of a town meeting where I could face opposition was really uncomfortable for me. And I worked with other folks who have been passing resolutions across the state and across the country to try to sort of shore up my my biggest concerns before heading into them. And so it was really helpful for me to have these conversations before going into town meeting. We did have to collect 125 signatures before even getting to town meeting. But what I did, I was telling both Lillian and Tony this ahead of time, what I did was during the collection of signatures in my town, I would have conversations along the way. I actually, first you go to your friends and family for signatures, then you do what you need to do and you stand outside of grocery stores or whatnot. And in those conversations, you hit opposition, you hear questions or concerns from people who might really oppose the resolution. The biggest opposition I got was, well, basically they believed that nuclear weapons made us safer, that having them, that the threat of deterrence was going to make us safer. And I would always begin by a conversation. I don't agree with that. I believe that they actually make us less safe, and here's why. Sometimes those conversations would turn sour quickly, and you can realize that people get very upset. They really believe that they do make us safer. They think I'm being outrageous. And in those cases, I just, in my mind, I say to myself, this person is not worth the time. It's not worth my energy. I have more people to educate. So I say, if we can agree to disagree, I'll hand them a pamphlet if they're willing. And if not, they walk on and they go into the grocery store. So there are always a couple of conversations that come up during the course of trying to get signatures that make it uncomfortable. And you just have to accept that. Not everyone's going to agree with you. And not everyone's going to feel that the cause is theirs. More importantly, what I found to be really useful when I was collecting signatures is to make little marks next to people who are particularly supportive in town. So I'd meet, Jane Smith, who would say, this is wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing this. We need to do this at the local level. I'd make a mark. I'd make sure that she wrote her name and signature very clearly. Her name and address very clearly on my signature form. And then I would follow up with a letter asking her to attend the town meeting. So I had probably 25 of these people who were particularly supportive that I wrote to afterwards with a little note, I'd actually typed out a letter that was sort of a generic letter, and I'd wrote a handwritten note saying, thank you for your support. I hope you can attend town meeting on X date. And that way I knew I was sort of stacking the town vote with people who were particularly supportive of me. I always include my contact information for people to ask questions. That was really useful. But even though some of the conversations were uncomfortable, I'd say the majority of them were very supportive. Most people wanted to know more, but not too much, because it's very difficult to understand the whole picture in one short conversation when they weren't expecting it and they're going in for groceries. So for me, it was really important to have this sort of elevator pitch. And then if people wanted more information, I had a way to arm them with information, bad pun, and to give them data or a brochure that they could take home or follow up. I had a lot of Back from Brink brochures. I had a way for them to contact me if they wanted to, but I did sort of wind up refining my elevator pitch from day to day. And I was explaining it to Lillian, but if anybody's interested in collecting signatures, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that. The other thing I found to be a useful lesson for me was to get a sense of what people's major hangups were about the resolution, about the Back from the Brink resolution ahead of time. So there are a lot of the same arguments which come up over and over again. One of them is sole authority. So a lot of people felt that the president should have sole authority over making a decision on nuclear, whether or not to launch a nuclear weapon, because they thought it could take too much time to circle back to Congress, have a conversation, and then need to launch a nuclear weapon. So often I would say, but what happens, this is just a scenario you bring out, what happens if there's somebody in power who accidentally makes an error and launches a weapon? And this has happened in history before. And so giving them an example of how this has happened before, with certain presidents almost setting off pressing the nuclear button, was eye-opening for some people. With this almost happened, when did this happen? Just having a couple of little examples of how this could happen by mistake was useful. I also found it, some people thought it was too lofty, that this goal was too idealistic to abolish nuclear weapons. And I would always say that, listen, we have had many more nuclear weapons in history than we do now, and we've taken them apart before. We have done it, and we can do it again. And usually that line is very encouraging for people. Oh, we've already done this. This is not something that's brand new. That really, I think, is inspiring for people. When I talk about the numbers of nuclear weapons that existed in the Cold War and how many we got rid of, it's actually quite simple to do it again. If you can do it then, you can do it now. So that, to me, is always hopeful and inspiring for people who think it's unrealistic. And then last, I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know what people have concerns about or questions about, but I would say that most people believe that this is too far-fetched. And so for me, it was a way to have a conversation about, if we don't do this, if we don't start here, we have no choice but to be threatened by nuclear weapons. And as Ira Helfand, one of GBPSR board members and IPPNW board members, has said before, we're currently in a situation where we're at great risk. The only possible option is to try. So what we're doing now is we're trying as from small communities to larger communities. We actually have 42 Congress people who have endorsed Back from the Brink. And that's 10% of Congress. Think about that. That's in 1 year, essentially. We've gained 10% of Congress has endorsed this. That's progress. This goes to show that it's definitely not impossible. And the only thing we can do is to get together as individuals who care and try to have a voice. And in the process, we're making conversations with people about the topic that most people don't know anything about. So it feels good to unite on this. And I do think that there's a lot of reason to bring a resolution forward to any town, even if it doesn't pass. It's still a way to have a conversation and to open, minds and begin questioning what we're currently doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much. I love that you use this campaign as an opportunity to have more dialogues, and to Molly's point, to really use it as an educational tool. And you definitely make standing in front of the grocery store much more joyful than I had imagined prior to hearing your story. So thank you so much. So last but not least, we have Peter Metz, who is another fellow nuclear abolition activist. And so Peter, I'll turn it over to you to share your story.
Thank you, Lillian, and thank you all for getting together on this issue. Tony, I sent you a signal asking if you would spotlight me, which I think is helpful for all the audience, for those when those of us are speaking. If you don't want to do that, since you gave me.
Oh, I just don't know how to do that.
Well, okay. Somehow just a second.
There you go.
You did it. Okay, see that now that makes me much bigger on all of your screens. Isn't that presumptuous of me? All right. But I want you to hear the message, and I'm going to start off with a couple of outrageous statements. I want to give you a little background as to why this is so important, as much as I want to talk about what we did in Needham, which was after all 5 years ago. Why is it so important? Well, in the statement of one leading figure in this battle, nuclear weapons are the most important existential threat to mankind. I'll say it again. Nuclear weapons are the most important existential threat to mankind. Now, most of you think of climate change as an existential threat, and it's the one that's got the most attention. But I'm going to tell you, and you can ask me why I say this, it is not the most important one. Okay, thing number two that I want you to be aware of, as Anna and Molly have described, we don't have anywhere near as many nuclear weapons as the world once did. So you'd think it would be safer. Well, no. The reason we got to a much smaller number, the reason we were able to do away with 50,000 nuclear weapons is that the leaders of the nuclear weapons powers, principally, and in fact, only Russia and the United States, woke up to the fact under Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, they just didn't need that many. If they wanted to really blow the two countries to smithereens, they needed far less than 75,000 nuclear weapons. So we're now down to 12 or 13,000 by virtue of a series of agreements that started under Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan. They've been succeeded by successor agreements steadily lowering the number, only between the United States and Russia. There is no treaty covering the other 9 nuclear nations, who have all held constant at a much smaller number. The largest number of nuclear weapons in the world after the United States and Russia is held by China. And until recently, it was only about 500. Well, they seem to now be growing them. For whatever reason, I don't know, because their 500 are more than enough to destroy anything that threatens them. But there's a certain amount of ego that goes with this, and a certain amount of plain old-fashioned dumb thinking that the bigger your weapon, the more powerful you are. So let me describe, and then goes this thinking that, well, nuclear weapons are a deterrent. Well, yes, but I draw the following analogy. Your neighbor in the house next to you hates you. He wants you out of the neighborhood. So he stockpiles his house with dynamite. Threaten you? Yeah, maybe I better get out of here. Okay, so he's deterred you from the neighborhood, right? So you say, well, I'm going to deter him back. He's not going to get away with this. I'm going to stockpile my house with dynamite. So he increases his stockpile. So you increase your stockpile. Well, guess who suffers? Of course, the two of you will be blown to smithereens, but so will most of the neighborhood. Is this sane? No, 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 no. That's what's going on. That is literally what the 9 nuclear nations have done. They have stockpiled their arsenal with weapons enough to obliterate themselves and all of their opponents and take out the rest of the world. So why did I say take out the rest of the world? Well, here's another interesting fact. Two of the 9 nuclear nations, little ones, India and Pakistan, if they go to nuclear war, the whole world suffers, not just India and Pakistan. There are now very reputable studies that show that the atmospheric side effects of nuclear war are far worse than the direct impacts of nuclear war. This is something that the nuclear war planners didn't know when they were building up our stockpiles. This is something that the nuclear war planners didn't even more recently didn't know. We only discovered this through a series of atmospheric studies, the same kind that eventually predicted climate change, in the same science that's used for climate change, that show that if India and Pakistan have what in the terminology of the nuclear war people is a small nuclear war, about 250 modest-sized nuclear weapons, 2 billion people across the world may starve to death. Now you say, wait a minute, we're talking about nuclear war. That's explosions, fire, radiation. What's this starvation stuff? Well, what happens is the climate gets changed by all the soot that gets generated from the fires in only the India and Pakistan cities. No fires anywhere else. There's so much soot that gets poured into the upper atmosphere that it girdles the earth, lowers the temperature in many, many places of the earth, makes food ungrowable, makes ocean stocks ungrown, alters the food stocks of the oceans, and 2 billion people starve to death. Up to, okay. It's just absolute insanity. It's intolerable. Your conscience all ought to be outraged at this point. Certainly mine is. And guess what? Where are those 2 billion people? Well, there are a couple 100 million in India and Pakistan. The rest of them are all over the rest of the world. There are 130 million in North America. Tell your fellow citizens that 130 million of you are going to die if Pakistan and India have a small nuclear war. They won't believe you. But the science shows that just as surely as science has shown that we're suffering from climate change. This is absolutely intolerable. It's inconscionable. This is not the way to run the world. This is not the way to determine our enemies. This is not decent human policy. This is absolutely inhumane. The Pope Francis, I happen to be Catholic. I like a lot of things about the Catholic Church, but most especially I like Pope Francis. And Pope Francis, realizing this about 5 years ago, no, actually 7 years ago now, declared that nuclear weapons were immoral, period, even to possess. Now, the Catholic Church has come a long way. Well, the Catholic Church took a very at that point, advanced position on nuclear weapons in 1982, where it said nuclear weapons are bad and they shouldn't exist, but it's okay for nations to have them for deterrence. Well, they didn't know about the atmospheric effects. They didn't think about them as the most murderous weapons that mankind has ever conceived. They didn't think about the fact that nuclear weapons obliterate 1 million people, maybe, in one fell swoop, just an attack on one major city. In fact, the estimate is if New York is attacked with a nuclear attack, it's probably 25 million people that die right there in New York. So it just that's not moral. That is not moral defense. That is not self-defense. That is not decent deterrence. That is just totally wrong. That's my view. And I just fail to see how anybody thinks it isn't wrong, and then we're going to get ourselves out of this pickle. Excuse me, wouldn't you know I'm getting a telephone call? Let me kill it. And if I do, I know what to do. Okay, excuse me. So that's outrageous statement number 3. They're immoral. They have to go for the sake of being decent human beings. And of course, they have to go for the sake of humanity. So what do we do about it? Well, Joe Biden has the answer. Believe it or not, Joe Biden has the answer. Back in 2018, Joe Biden gave a very thoughtful, incredibly detailed speech on nuclear weapons policy as he was leaving the vice presidency. So he had no constraints. He wasn't running for re-election. He didn't have to please anybody. He could say what was on his mind. And I can refer you to the speech. But in that speech, he says, if we want a world without nuclear weapons, the United States must take the initiative to lead us there. He didn't say could or would or might or should. He said must. And then he went on in the next sentence to say, because we are the only nation to have ever used nuclear weapons, we have a great moral responsibility to lead the charge. Lead the charge. He wasn't talking about hanging back. He wasn't talking. Okay, now that's Joe Biden of 7 years ago. Why in the world, after being president for 3 years, has he done nothing about it? I cannot explain. But it probably tells you about something about the pressure our politicians are under. So what is Back from the Brink about? It's about relieving the awful pressure that politicians are on to espouse might and force to the destruction of humanity. It's about telling them, we support you if you want to get nuclear weapons. And so Back from the Brink says, first and foremost, the United States should take the initiative to bring the 9 nuclear nations together to arrange an agreement to totally eliminate their nuclear weapons. And the only way we're ever going to be safe from nuclear weapons is to totally eliminate them. Now, can you do that? Well, of course you can do it. As Ira Helfand likes to say, these are just tiny little machines, not much bigger than the chair you're sitting on in many cases, despite the fact that they can blow vast portions of humanity away. We have disassembled 50,000 of them over the last 40 years. We can certainly disassemble the last 20. So no mechanical problems, no physical problems, no population problems like there are with climate change. If we're to conquer climate change, we have to convince everybody to change their lifestyle, to use less energy, to be more conservative, etc. Everybody has to change their lifestyle. Nobody has to change their lifestyle to eliminate nuclear weapons. Nobody, except 9 men. And I point out they are men. There isn't a woman amongst them, damn it. And I'm sorry, I want you to be outraged. I want you to be outraged that your government is not telling you of the threats you're living under. That tomorrow, huge sectors of humanity could be wiped out by an accident, by some malicious person, by cyber attack, by a mechanical or electronic failure. I mean, this is the nuclear weapons situation in the world, particularly between the United States and Russia, is incredibly complicated. And I'm an engineer, so I can appreciate some of this. It's an incredibly complicated system that involves all kinds of electronics, mechanics, physical structures, etc. It's so complicated, it's bound to have failures. Well, is it failure proof? Well, we actually know it is not. We have come perilously close in at least 13 instances over the last 40 years to launching nuclear weapons because we thought we were under attack, because somebody put the wrong training tape in the command center in Cheyenne Mountain, because of it just, you wouldn't drive this car if somebody gave it to you. The risk evaluation would make it absolutely uninsurable. You wouldn't go near it, but we're living with it. It's just absolutely outrageous. Back from the Brink is an attempt to get a lot of the population to just stand up and declare. And it's a wonderful attempt. And it's been going on for a number of years. It deserves Watertown's enthusiastic support. What I want you to do is get it through your city council, but create a huge fuss about it. Don't shrink from controversy. Don't try to slip it through. Create a huge fuss, because that's an education opportunity where you get to make talks like you've just heard to alarm people, to alert people, and to get them to act. And finally, before I finish, I had a major hand in producing an online video event that ran 4 weeks ago, and I've put it in the chat. About 20 people worked for 4 months to assemble a forum called Building a World Without Nuclear Weapons, an Urgent Imperative. And it arose mostly originally out of our Catholic beliefs and our desire to follow the lead of Pope Francis and a wonderful American cleric named Archbishop John Wester, who's from New Mexico. And there's a lot I can say about Archbishop John Wester. I've had the privilege of meeting him. I haven't met the Pope yet, but I'm going for it. Okay. Why not? Think of it. Could you imagine what it'd be like to be in the presence of John Paul? He loves everybody. He kisses people's feet. He cares about the world. He's out there beating himself to death. That's what we all fear. Anyway, John Wester is an equally wonderful person. Not quite so, he doesn't command the stage, but he has taken a leadership position in the Catholic Church and now in the nuclear abolition movement, a prominent nuclear. So this webinar features him. It features Dr. Ira Helfand of PNW, the man who is most responsible for Molly and Anna and my belief. Ira Helfand is actually the one who converted me 6 years ago to completely change my field and concentrate on nuclear weapons. I've only been at this 6 years. Both of them have been at it longer than I have. Anyway, and a wonderful woman who leads the nonviolence initiative in the Catholic Church named Marie Helfand. They each give 10-minute talks. Then there's some discussion. Then there's a call to action. And that has to be an essential part of everything we do. We have to ask people to act. Now, the call to action we included there has 6 items in it, 2 of which any American citizen who can pick up the telephone can do in 2 minutes. One is called, actually, for the president, yeah, you can call the president, but damn them, they have now limited the White House contact line to 3 days a week. How do they get away with that? Well, Donald Trump could shut it off completely. So Joe Biden did a magnanimous thing. He restored 3 days a week to what was once I think a 5-day a week White House call-in line where they would record your calls. Anyway, you can go online, and in our call to action, which you'll see if you go to the website that I've indicated there, there's a click-through link. Takes you right to the page where you can write President Biden a message that says, get rid of nuclear weapons, however you want to phrase it. Just be very direct. Tell him you're impassioned, you're determined, and you want his leadership. And the second thing you can do is tell, help me, Tony, you're a congressman. Tony, rescue me.
Clark, Representative
Yes,
Clark.
Catherine Clark, the number 3 person in the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. Tell her she should support House Resolution 77. And don't fiddle around. Don't let her tell you, well, I'm in a leadership position. I can't take far out position. Oh, nonsense. That's what leaders are supposed to do, is take leadership positions. So you got to really lay it on her that she has a moral responsibility to take a leadership position and put her name on House Resolution 77, which is the Back from the Brink bill before the U.S. House of Representatives. So it's pretty simple, folks. It's death-defying. It threatens to wipe out civilization. It could happen tomorrow. But the answer is very simple. We all contact Joe Biden and tell him it's time to take the leadership position that he called for. And we all get our congressman to support House Resolution 77, which says the same thing. Thank you very much.
Peter, can you take a short period of time, maybe 3 minutes, and tell us about Needham and how it happened?
Oh, okay. Well, you heard so much that I can't add much to it. I'll add a couple of things. Needham is a representative town government, okay? So Anna had the hardest problem. In Marshfield, it's a town government, right, Anna? Every citizen who wants to go to town meeting can vote. In Needham, we only had 300 people whose minds we had to change. So that was thing number one. Watertown has it simple. How many people on your town council, Tony? 20?
Nine.
If you can't change the minds of 5 of the 9 people, then give it up, guys. Come on. Of course you can. But you're going to have to badger them. You're going to have to get with them, pull their coat lapels, do what Tip O'Neill taught us to do. All politics is local. Go talk to them. Okay. Yes, gather signatures, the whole works. But eventually you have to persuade 5 people on that 9-man council to vote for this resolution. All right.
Thank you.
So you have the simplest task of any of the 3 of us. Let me tell you what happened in Needham. We got the ball rolling in Needham 5 years ago. My friends in Newton, I lived in Newton for 25 years. They said, oh my God, Needham is going to beat us to it. Holy cow. So they rushed into the city council of Needham, which has 25 representatives, and they corral the winning vote. And then they went, yeah, we beat you. Well, that's okay. What do we have to do to get a majority of 300 people to vote for this? We did a couple of things. First of all, we contacted every one of them. Try that on for size. But Anna's really got it stumped because Anna didn't know who was going to show up at her town meeting, because any citizen can show up at her town meeting. So I got to tell you, folks, you have the simplest task of all of us. Second of all, I'm sorry, I don't want to make it simple. It's not simple. It's absolutely not simple, but it's doable. It's very, very doable if you work hard at it, if you gather people, you show popular support, but use this occasion. So one of the biggest obstacle we ran into, which I'm sure is an obstacle you will run into, is people said, oh, wait a minute, this is Watertown. That's a national issue. That's an international issue. Watertown has no place in getting involved in a national issue. And then we heard in Needham, and I don't know if you'll hear this in Watertown because you're a little more progressive. Needham is not it's getting more progressive, but Needham is not a progressive town. And we heard, well, if you let you crazy, if we approve your far out national issue idea, then we're going to be besieged by all other kinds of national issues. The abortion rights people will be on us. And they went on. Okay. We said, no, they won't. No, they won't. No, they won't. All right. 5 years later, no other national issues have come before the Needham town meeting. None. We did another thing. We got some prominent people to speak up for us. I worked for Michael Dukakis at one point in my career and have stayed friends with him. And Michael Dukakis is keen on this issue. So I got Michael Dukakis to write a letter, actually. And when I called him and said, Mike, can you give me a letter that we could read at the town meeting that tells the town of Needham how important this issue is? He said, yeah, Peter, I can do that. You write it. So I wrote it. He signed it. I delivered it. So think about some tricks like that. Who are the most prominent citizens in Watertown? Can you get them to issue some statements? Okay. I mean, really think about it, because this is an opportunity to build allies. If you ask somebody to do something and they do it for you, they are hooked onto your cause, at least a little bit. So single out a couple of prominent citizens. This is what I would say. Single out a couple of prominent citizens in Watertown that you don't normally hear from and don't normally have anything to do with nuclear weapons, but you think might be amenable to making a public statement on this issue, and go after them. Why not? You'll use this opportunity to garner all kinds of allies for a fabulous cause.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it, Tony. Those are the lessons from Needham.
Okay, thank you. Lillian, shall we open it up for questions? So, folks,
yes, that sounds great. Thank you so much to Peter, Anna, and Molly.
Yes, thank you. Excellent.
Our pleasure.
Let's
let me just say one other thing.
No.
Ollie, Anna, and I are willing to help you show up at any of your meetings or anything else. Just invite us.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's great to know.
It's an opportunity for us too.
So let's open it up for questions. It's a small group, so just raise your hand and we'll, Joe, you have a question?
So it's more just a comment to kind of fill in about the possible meaning of Watertown voting for it.
Yeah.
We ignorant of our history. And so people may want to be aware or remember that the nuclear weapons freeze movement of the 1980s, began with a written statement. It moved to votes in 17 Vermont towns in 1981, followed the next year by 330 towns across New England and 8 states voting for it, which basically led Senator Kennedy and then Representative Markey to try to move to lead the disarmament movement in Congress, and then to 1 million people, and ultimately, with a lot of other things happening too, to the INF Treaty and the end of the Cold War. So just to kind of reaffirm that while people may say it's local, this kind of action can have really international ramifications.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Diane. You're muted, Diane.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. I've been concerned for many years about people thinking that what we used to call Star Wars is a good thing, because I think it makes nuclear war much more likely if one side thinks the other can stop them, that they're more likely to strike first. So I wondered if any people are thinking about what to do about that issue. I don't know if it's still going strong, that we're still trying to build all that stuff or not. Does anyone know?
I haven't heard of any. Go ahead.
I can partly answer that question. It's not an active thing being pursued on a large scale, but the military is still tinkering with the technology. They still run experiments. A couple times a year, they send missiles up over the Pacific and try to shoot them down from ships and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they still are, and I don't have a big problem with it. It's a waste of money, of course, but I don't have a big problem with it, except that what you need to know is historically, Ronald Reagan's fascination with Star Wars and the idea that he could build a missile shield over the United States blocked Gorbachev from being willing to work for zero. Gorbachev, in this very important meeting, in what was it, Joseph, 1985, where they agreed, another famous statement, a nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought. This is Ronald Reagan, the hawk, the guy who called Russia the evil empire, the guy who set out to build a 600-ship U.S. Navy. He declared with Ronald Reagan that a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. It's not just we can't win, it should never be fought. Okay, anyway, Ronald Reagan said, well, jeepers, Gorbachev, I'm paraphrasing this, obviously. Nobody was there. Nobody's documented the exact dialogue. Gorbachev said, well, we can talk about zero, but I want this Star Wars. I want this thing. And Gorbachev said, well, if you're going to have that, then I don't have any power over you, and I can't concede that, so I'm not willing to talk about zero. Let's just bring it down to something decent. And so that started it, but the whole idea defeated what could have been a thrust for zero way back then. And it's an absolutely impossible concept. The Iron Dome in Israel, it gets most of the weapons, but doesn't get all of them. And all it takes is a couple of big nuclear missiles to get through to create utter devastation. That's why we say the only way to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used is to eliminate them.
If I could just jump in, can I just jump in for a second? It's a little bit worse than that. Missile defenses, at least those of the United States, are part of a first strike doctrine. Right. The idea, and the Chinese are very clear that this has got to be eliminated, because the idea is that you launch your first strike, wipe out almost all of the other side's nuclear weapons, and then your missile defenses are there to mop up what survives and comes back at you in a retaliatory attack. So we need to understand that missile defenses is actually part of an aggressive first strike scenario.
Right, that's what I thought too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Lillian, you had a question, I think. Did you have a question, Lillian? Okay, well, I have one for Anna. Anna, can you paraphrase your elevator speech for us that you used when you approached someone to sign the petition?
Sure, I have to sort of dust off my memory. I think I would start by saying, this is a national campaign, and we're making local efforts all around the country to try to pass a resolution to abolish nuclear weapons. And we do that in 5 ways. The ways are all listed here. I wouldn't go through each one of them. I would basically say all of those 5 ways are listed on the Back from the Brink brochure here if you want more information. But essentially, we believe that nuclear weapons do not make us safe. And this resolution would cost our town no money at all. It's basically just a voice telling our local and federal representatives that it's unacceptable for us to be facing this risk. And it's a risk that poses, it threatens the health and livelihood of our future generations. And there's really no acceptable way to live underneath nuclear weapons in this culture. So it's a step in the direction of abolishing them. And in the process, it opens conversation. And we hope that you'll, take part in this movement. It was very broad, and I purposely left it that way because I wanted people to get sort of the feeling of it rather than get hung up on the details, which they could always learn more about. So I'd start there, and people would ask questions like, well, how would this make a difference anyway? And I would say, well, first of all, did you know that we used to have all these, I'd had the statistic down, used to have this many weapons, and now we have this many. Did you know that the US is one of only 9 nuclear armed states? Did you know that between us and Russia, we own 90% of them? I don't believe they make us safer. I'd go down, if they asked me questions, I'd go down the list of why I thought it was a reasonable campaign. Okay. Most of the time, I didn't even go there, but I started with the other thing I thought that was really important to say was, just so you know, this is not a vote for the campaign. This is to allow it to get to a vote. And people usually feel comfortable with that. All I'm asking for is your signature to allow this to get to the town vote. I'm not asking you to endorse the campaign. I'm asking you to allow it to be on the ballot, or to allow it to get to town meeting, whatever you're facing there. So, and Tony, let me just clarify. I know Peter Metz was saying, Watertown has it easiest because you only have to convince 5 out of 9 selectmen. I'm not even sure I actually would say Cambridge has the easiest. No offense, Molly, but most of the people who are already on the select board or the city council were supportive of it to begin with. I know Watertown does have some resistance, but doesn't it potentially have to go to town meeting in Watertown?
No, we don't have a town meeting.
Or sorry, not town meeting, a larger vote?
No, just goes to the council.
It does go to the council.
Yeah.
I had thought at some point you were saying the town council could just determine to do this on their own or something else. Is that not?
The town council could, when it gets in front of them, and they have to address it in some way when the citizen petition gets through, gets the necessary 150 signatures, valid signatures. It goes to the council. The council will have to have a public meeting to discuss it. And at that point, they can either defeat it, they can pass it, or they can move it to another committee for further discussion.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So they can determine the path it takes.
Yes.
But if they have overwhelming, residential support, they're more likely to support it themselves.
That's true. That's it. Yeah. And if they see, I'm saying the minimum number of signatures is 150 valid signatures. But if you submit, I've seen citizen petitions with 450 signatures on them.
Right. Well, and that's one approach, is just to get a lot of signatures. But the other approach is, instead of stacking town meeting like I did in Marshfield with supporters, you can have that public meeting be filled with a room of people who really believe.
Yeah.
And I would argue that signatures is one thing, but having bodies there in person who are willing to vouch for it is even more significant.
Yes. And anybody who attends a meeting for a public hearing, which this would have to have, can speak for 2 minutes. So, and 2 minutes is, you can say a lot in 2 minutes if you have it thought through a little bit. So,
sure.
So I had another question around, you had mentioned that one of the questions that people seem to raise questions about was the sole authority issue. And then I think you told me that also there was a concern about the in
The
the resolution, we
modernization clause.
call for cutting back on the modernization of the weapons and the 1.7 trillion that would be spent over the next 30 years. Is that, did you have to answer that concern?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that most people don't get to the fine print like that. I mean, if it comes up in town meeting, that's usually one of the hangups. People say, well, don't we need them? Don't we need to modernize our weapons to maintain, you know, the fighting power, essentially, you know, with these other nuclear armed states? And we would say we have way more than we even need. You know, and we'd go into the spending of it. What could that be in terms of healthcare? What could, you know, if you really want to get into the details of the spending, we could go there, but we could destroy the world several times over with what we currently have. And I just flat out disagree with the modernization clause. But that's usually, if there's going to be a hang up, it's either sole authority or modernization. That's my experience. But again, it's, you know, it's something you can agree to disagree on, and you can state those simple points about how much we're spending and how much damage we could do with the current arsenal.
Molly, you put something in the chat. Why don't you just tell us what you said? I didn't catch it.
Oh, I was just responding to Anna's point, you know, of having as many supporters in the room the day of the vote or the day that this is brought to the council. And this is probably partially because we did this in 2021 when a lot of COVID restrictions were still in place, but we had a pretty large email campaign the day of the vote to encourage as many people as possible to send in a form email that we already had ready. People can just copy and paste and send it to the counselors, and then it's all in writing. So folks aren't able to make it that day, or sometimes it's just too much of an ask to get people out on a weekday, especially if it's in the winter. You know, there are a number of reasons why people are busy. It's hard enough to sometimes to get people to get on Zoom calls. So just to share that as an option as well.
Any other people before I
Tony, I want to add to the answers you just heard.
Yep, yeah, just one. Yep. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Well, the 5 provisions in Back from the Brink are not all of equal importance. The first one is the most important, and it's the one that calls on the United States to, as Joe Biden once put it, lead the charge. That's not what the wording says, but that's what it calls for. The United States to get the other 8 nuclear nations together to reach an agreement on how to collaterally eliminate their nuclear weapons. This is not, by the way, just in a parenthetic, we are not advocating unilateral disarmament. That would be crazy. For us to give up our nuclear weapons with Vladimir Putin threatening us? No way. Okay, I'm maybe an advocate, I may be an idealist, but I'm not an idiot. And we are not advocating nuclear, and you needed to address that, because if you talk about the United States taking a leading position on eliminating nuclear weapons, most people say, oh, well, so the United States should get rid of its nuclear weapons. You have to be clear. No, only in concert with the others, but this is doable. So that's thing number one. That's the most important provision. The other 4 provisions are things that can be done along the way as part of those negotiations to develop good faith. So you back down on some of the most fearsome things in agreement with other people to eliminate their first strike capability, or to take away single person authority to launch nuclear weapons. Although the United States is one of the few nations where that is the case. And by the way, that has to be gotten rid of. Just imagine if Donald Trump was back in the White House. I'm sorry, folks. Apart from your politics, I don't trust Donald Trump with the button. That's the guy who said, my button's bigger than yours, Kim Jong-un. I don't want another back. Anyway, so there are 4 other provisions, but the first one is the most important. Ask people to focus on that. Tell them the others are in support. So that's the way you deal with that.
Okay.
And the other thing I want to say is, well, you may only need 150 signatures, but I'm going to challenge you folks. I want you to go out and get 1,000 signatures. I want you to get 1,000 signatures of your fellow citizens on Back from the Brink. Set a record. Okay.
Okay.
It's a great target. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a great target. And what I have found, sorry, Tony, what I have found is that a bold goal that's noble inspires people. And if you tell them you're in a crusade to get rid of nuclear weapons and I need you to go out on the street and stand next to Stop and Shop for an afternoon and get us 440 signatures, some people will do that. You'll find enough. You will find enough.
Okay. Let me ask one other question of Anna, and because Peter mentioned that he said look for prominent people, and he got Mike Dukakis. Anna and Molly, did you reach out in the period of gathering support to any particular organ? I think Molly said you did reach out to some organizations. Anna, did you reach out to any? Were there any other organizations in Marshfield that you reached out to see if you could get support?
Not organizations, but legislators. So we have my local rep and our statewide senator, Patrick O'Connor. Both supported this resolution. And so I got quotes from both of them. And it was really helpful. I actually got up in front of town meeting and I read the quotes from them. You know, Senator Patrick O'Connor supports it because of this, and Representative Patrick Kearney supports it. Actually, I had three. I also had Josh Cutler. And that was invaluable because it was like not just Anna Lanakia speaking in front of the meeting, but this has credibility beyond that. So even if you don't have a local rep, if you have somebody who's reputable or who's a known person, you know, Congressman McGovern says this, you know, there's a lot of, in Massachusetts, we have a lot of supporters. We have 4 out of our 9 Congress people who have already supported this. So we could even quote some of them. We have Peter Metz and I just met with Congressman Keating, and he was showing a lot of support for this. He hasn't endorsed it yet, but that's just an example of how much support there is. And hopefully Congresswoman Clark is next. But having some quotes, I think, went a long way.
Molly, did you, when you reached out to some organizations, were they helpful to you?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it was organizations at the time that I reached out to that I knew were already supportive of Back from the Brink. But I think reaching out to climate groups is a really great idea. You know, Peter went through some of the climate impacts of nuclear war. There are some really clear tie-ins there. You know, all climate mitigation efforts can be funded by divesting from nuclear weapons. You know, there are many ties there that I think would be powerful, and I'm certain there are strong climate groups in Watertown that you all are already familiar with. You know, there are clearly also ties to justice, social justice, social injustice. So looking at all those ties and maybe being creative, it's a way to build bridges and build partnerships.
Well, Molly, this is the climate organization for Watertown too. So you guys got it made.
Let me.
I'm sorry.
Let me do 2 things. One, I'm going to I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you our resolution. This is a draft we did, and I wanted to make sure you had a chance to take a look at it. And also, I wanted to make sure we don't lose anybody who's interested in working in a group to do this. So let me first just share my screen and give you an idea of what we're looking at here. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Can you see
There
it
you go.
now?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Now, if you can stretch it down, Tony, we'll see more. And if you can enlarge it like you did with our practice session.
You want it bigger than this? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's almost unreadable.
Oh.
I can read that. I don't know if others.
How's that? Is that
That's better.
That's better.
That looks good, Tony.
Okay. So we I created this based on a number of different resolutions that were passed. Anna made sure I saw the one from Marshfield, the one from Cambridge, the one from Needham, and also all the other resolutions that have passed around the country are on the website Back from the Brink. And Back from the Brink had a standard, a boilerplate resolution, so I took a lot of it from there. But so we talked first about quickly about how many weapons we had and how many are now down to approximately so many. Who has those weapons? How about a small number could kill millions and have environmental catastrophe, disruption, dropping temperatures below, and and Peter mentioned this starvation of millions.
Billions.
That should be
Number
billions.
into billions.
Okay, I'll change that to B. And then we talk a little bit about the first use of nuclear weapons, and then I merged the two concerns about unchecked authority and the right to use nuclear weapons first. This one I think is important. It's this idea that they will never be used to guarantee that they will be never used on multiple occasions. I think we need to get those times when they were almost used. We need to have that as a background piece, Lillian, at some point. We need to dig that out. And I know Joe has written a book about the number of times that we threatened to use nuclear, not just us, but other countries have threatened to use nuclear weapons in crisis. We'll talk about the climate crisis and the increased tension. I wanted to bring this in. I was going to think about saying increased tension, particularly in Ukraine and in the in Taiwan, but I figured rather than muddy the waters, we just say that there's increased tension between countries who have nuclear weapons. So if you think that should be with it, we should actually name China as and the tension around Taiwan, and we should mention the threat of nuclear weapons that Russia has threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. We could change this. And then the investment issue around money, and then the specifics around money. How much the United States is planning to use. This information came right out of back from the brink. And then I did steal some information about how much we're spending every hour. And then what I went through, as Molly said, I went to the National Priorities Project and got this information about how much we're paying as taxpayers in 2023. Then we went right to the first call to actively pursue a verifiable agreement. I didn't use the word unilateral, but I think verifiable agreement sort of does it. And then we went through the other 5 areas, and then with the resolution about Clark, sending it to Clark, Warren, and Markey, the final resolve, therefore be it resolved. And then the signatures. So that's what we're going to put. I'll make the change on the. I wonder if people think Peter mentioned there's a quote from Reagan and there's a quote from Biden. I'm wondering if you think we should eliminate one of these and put that in there. So if people have some thoughts on that, I'd love to hear that.
I think it's stronger, Tony, without that, but
okay.
It's a little bit odd in that kind of document to be just quoting somebody or somebody's.
I'm sorry, Sue Ellen, why do you say that?
It just doesn't feel like it fits that kind of document, whereas X, Y, Z, and then therefore this, to suddenly have the quotes thrown in there from a particular person or persons that you choose to quote. I guess I'd rather see that happen at the meeting when the public can attend and actually speak to the counselors, to the city councilors.
Are you saying that the quote from Reagan and Gorbachev that a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought is not a relevant quote?
It's relevant. I don't believe it belongs in this document. There are other places to use that in the campaign. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think we also going to need a fact sheet along, when we hand it out to people. And I think what we'll need there is a fact sheet. People say, I'm not sure I want to sign it today. So you say, well, here it is, and here's a QR code, or no, we can't use a QR code because they have to actually sign it. But here's a document, a talking point piece that you could take home with you. Now, I saw two hands up, and I didn't know where they went.
It was Susan, Tony.
Yeah, I had mine up. I was basically going to say that same thing. If we're going to have a brochure or a fact sheet, that's where those quotes could be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And was it Joe? Joe?
Yeah, just to say, I'm happy for it to go on a fact sheet, but that really is, it was reiterated actually by, I believe it was reiterated by both Biden and Putin at one of the meetings before the world went to hell. And it's really a that's really kind of the core really at the highest levels of disarmament negotiations and international relations. I mean that quotation and having the most powerful people say it is a keystone in the whole disarmament process.
Thank you.
I want to emphasize that the fact that Ronald Reagan, the Republican war hawk, made that statement counts for a lot. And Joseph's right. It has been quoted and requoted. I was part of a group that fought to get Putin and Biden to reiterate that statement the first time they got together. And I'm pretty sure, Joseph, you can correct me, that Biden and Xi reiterated the statement when they came out of their meeting in California just a couple months ago.
Well, now, why don't you send me that?
Being on the fact sheet is fine.
Yeah, sure. Oh, absolutely.
You're gonna, Peter, you're gonna send me the actual quotes again, so I appreciate that.
I will.
I'm gonna. It is just about 8:30, so I know we've. I think we're right on time here. I'm going to say what the next steps are I'd like to do. We do have a working group. It's the Peace and Common Security Working Group. It's now been 2 years, a 2-year-old working group, a part of Watertown Citizens, which, as you heard about our other working groups, we're working a lot on Gaza, and we're working on this project on nuclear weapons. I'd like to create, with Lillian's leadership, we would like to create a small working group to meet and to do some planning to figure out how the best to proceed to start getting signatures on it. And I just wanted to offer that anybody who is interested in doing that. Oh, go ahead, Lillian. Why don't you, what did you say? You take it from me, please.
Oh, no, I was just messaging Tony that I have Tony and I thought we could have a Google form. So anybody who is interested in joining forces on this, that we are going to organize a sub working group, to Tony's point. So I'll plop the Google form in the chat. So
thank you. I forgot that we have an advanced, knowledgeable young person about doing such things quickly and efficiently. So thank you, Lillian. So please really take a look at that. If you want to, we really do need a core group. We do need a core. And I know that there's some people in our common security, our peace and common security, like Diana, who's been working on nuclear weapons for most of her life as an advocate. So there's a few other people who might want to work as a subgroup of the larger group. We have a couple of subgroup around Gaza, so we're looking to try to do a subgroup around this effort. Lillian, do you have any final comments?
No, just that I'm so grateful for everybody's time, for Anna, Molly, and Peter for joining. And I'm really excited more than anything to work together. I feel like these days, everything we do can feel isolating in some ways. So I'm looking forward to coming together as Watertown citizens to take action on this cause. So thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here with us. It's really great, and a lot of great help having Joe and others besides our particularly invited guests, but there's just so much knowledge of this group of people already here. It's really, really helpful. And Tony, I forgot to mention, I'm happy at some point, just because of my incorrigible editing mode, to take care of some of the typos in the resolution.
Great. I'll make sure I send it to you. Okay.
So thank you all.
If I could have an almost last word.
Yes.
I leave for Japan on Sunday for Japanese, kind of the anchor events of the Japanese nuclear disarmament movement. And, you know, being able to tell people there about what people are doing here reinforces them there, which in turn reinforces us here. So if it's possible, Sue Ellen, to send me the revised text before the end of the day Saturday, I can take some of the copies with me, and that will encourage them.
Sure.
Just one other thing to say, that, you know, Rachel Maddow, you know, has this book Prequel, and she's talking about, you know, the absolute essential nature to defend democracy, and just to appreciate that one of the other parts of what we did tonight, it was part of building and defending democracy, and we should just appreciate that.
Right.
Thank you, Joe.
Tony, I'm not trying to get the last word, but I want to add to Joseph's. He's reminded me, I'm following him to Japan a week later. I'm going to Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a bunch of people who want to have firsthand contact with those folks. We'll be meeting with Hibakusha and town officials and religious officials there and so on. And I think Joseph's got a great idea, and I'd love to carry your statement as a work in progress to these people as a demonstration of American goodwill. I'd be really pleased to do that.
Great. Well, I will send it immediately after this meeting to Sue Ellen. Sue Ellen can send it back to me. We'll get it all cleaned up, and we'll get it out and to Joe and to you, Peter, and we'll start to, you know, meet as a group and start to get signatures. And both Molly and Anna have graciously offered to help us in whatever way we can, and we're going to rely on them. I'm sure we are, and also Peter. So thank you all very much for attending. Lillian, thank you for your leadership on this. And Anna, Molly, and Peter, thank you very much. You all
I'm very pleased. Good for you folks.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good.
Thank you so much. Good night.